home for staying with us for the next hour. Happy Inauguration Day to you as well. For all Americans, it's a happy Inauguration Day, because anytime we have an inauguration, it means that our republic still exists. And the continual, renewal of there being new presidents is a process that continues. That in itself, formatically, is a good thing. Who's with me? Come on. All right, I have somebody to introduce you to on this fine inaugural Friday. His name is Tim Araya. Tim Araya is the bass player and the lead singer for the band Slayer. And being the lead singer of the band Slayer is a job, actually being anybody in the band Slayer, it's a job that has specific requirements that don't apply to all that many other jobs in life. One of the things you have to do if you're in the band Slayer is you have to really wang your head around a lot. All the time. Every time you play in public, anytime you shoot a video, everything. Bang your head. And it's one thing if you're like in a metal band for a year in high school and you're 16 and you're basically made of rubber, right? But the guys in Slayer have been doing this for a very, very long time. They've been doing this for decades. They're a very successful band. They haven't gone away, but the guys in Slayer are now old guys. And there are just these 7 little vertebrae in your neck, in all of our necks. And once you're no longer in high school and you're an awesome metal dude who has started to turn gray, right? And you're still wanging your head around as part of your day job, those little vertebrae in your neck don't like it when you do that for decades. And so, there he is. In January, Tim Araya got cervical radiculopathy, which is a bad thing. And in order to deal with his cervical radiculopathy, he had to get surgery on his neck. And that was a drag for him. It was also a drag for a bunch of other aging metal dudes in his band and in other bands. It was also a drag for their fans because him having to get surgery delayed the mega metal all-star tour that was due to start in January 2010. This was an incredible tour. This was not just going to be Slayer. This was going to be Slayer and Megadeth and Testament all playing the same concert, all playing at the same night. This was an incredible tour. And because of the surgery, the whole tour had to get postponed because the Slayer guy had to get an anterior cervical discectomy to deal with all the consequences of all of his decades of vigorous headbanging. And, nobody knew if the show would be able to go on, but lo and behold, it turns out the Almighty smiles even on bands named Slayer. And Tim Araya recovered, and we did, in the end, get, this is the important part, look at the top there, see the red banner at the top there? It's kind of bloody background. That's right, the American Carnage Tour. You can still buy posters. You can still buy commemorative posters from the American Carnage Tour. It's funny, by the time they got to their Canadian dates, they changed it to the Canadian Carnage Tour. But when they were in America, it was the American Carnage Tour. As you see on the poster there, it was a meeting of metal titans, Slayer and Megadeth and Testament. And even though it had been in doubt, it had to be delayed, it did happen. And for a certain generation of metal fans, that was metal heaven on earth. Slayer and Megadeth, same night. And before today, if you were looking for American carnage in our national cultural life, that is what it was. It was when Slayer and Megadeth toured together in 2010 after the Slayer guy had his neck surgery and nobody knew if he'd be able to make it. That was American carnage before today. Now, as of today, American Carnage will be forever known as the theme for the inaugural address of the 45th President of the United States.
Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities, rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation, an education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime, and the gangs, and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
American carnage. Not the medal tour, but the presidential inaugural address theme. Bang your head. A lot of Americans proverbially did that today. This is an unusual presidential transition. The president who left office today left Washington with among the highest approval ratings of any departing president ever. The president who arrived in Washington today arrived with lower approval ratings than any incoming president in the history of U.S. polling. The incoming president who was sworn in today, he lost the popular vote by the largest popular vote margin ever for an incoming president. He lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. His party lost seats in both the House and the Senate, even as he won the presidency. A lot of Americans, as he takes office, tell opinion pollsters that they are profoundly worried or pessimistic or even scared about what his presidency will mean for our country. And we had known heading into this inaugural weekend that there would be large-scale protests against the new president tomorrow. Overall, we're told that the Secret Service permitted more than 100 protest events for the inaugural weekend. But that women's march that's permitted for tomorrow, that's expecting over 200,000 people. We knew to expect a lot of large anti-Trump demonstrations tomorrow. We did not necessarily expect to see this much anti-Trump protesting today at the inauguration itself, between the inauguration and the parade, and alongside the route of the inaugural parade. In addition to those peaceful protests today, there were also violent protests today in Washington, D.C., violent protests of the kind that we really haven't seen before at presidential inaugurations. A lot of us old people remember the large and rowdy protests that happened 16 years ago at the first inauguration of George W. Bush. Following that very controversial election result, the Supreme Court ruling in Gore v. Bush. I remember those 2001 protests being a big, hairy deal at that inauguration. Well, we checked those records today from the 2001 protests. Turns out those protests against George W. Bush in 2001, they resulted in 9 arrests, mostly for disorderly conduct. Today in D.C., there were 217 arrests. And that may not be a final number, because some inaugural protest actions have apparently continued into this evening. Off the inaugural route, but in the streets of D.C. today, at times it was a scary mess. Protesters setting fires, breaking windows, throwing newspaper boxes, throwing bricks at police. Several D.C. police officers were injured today. Reporters on the scene of those protests, including our own reporters, described the violent group among the protesters as basically a persistent and committed but small minority among the much larger group of anti-Trump folks who showed up in D.C. today just to hold signs and peacefully make themselves heard or maybe argue with Trump supporters. But because this small but committed and violent minority did what they did today, part of what the Trump inauguration will be remembered for evermore is these scenes of violence and fire in the street created by the relatively small group of people who went to D.C. today, committed to breaking stuff and hurting people instead of being heard. Outside of D.C., there were other protests around the country today, which again seemed to be larger than what had been expected. You see the people there along that banner? Now they're covered up by the, there you go. Now, San Francisco, people formed a human chain all the way across the Golden Gate Bridge, apparently all the way down and back, 2,200 people. Thousands more people crossed the bridge today as part of a demonstration against the new president. There are a bunch of different kinds of protests in San Francisco today, in addition to what happened on the bridge. The more disorderly protests resulted in 29 arrests in San Francisco. There were also protests today and into tonight in Oakland, California. In Colorado, there were pretty large-scale protests in Denver. Austin, Texas saw some pretty good-sized protests today. There were protests at the state capitol building in Tennessee. There were protests today in Kansas City, Missouri. There were big protests today in Boston, Massachusetts. Also a number of different protest sites today in Philadelphia, in Los Angeles. Today and tonight there were protests that resulted in dozens of arrests. And here I will stop talking for a second so you can hear my favorite moment from the Chicago protest today, which is when the brass band at the protest started playing the Darth Vader theme. That was Chicago today, one of the cities that saw protests around the country today. And again, a very large protest is expected tomorrow in Washington, D.C., possibly the largest counter-inaugural protest ever. It's the Women's March. It's not all women, but it's going to be substantially women. They've had more than 200,000 RSVPs. There will also be apparently hundreds of other coordinated marches around the country, sort of in alliance with that large Women's March tomorrow in D.C. In D.C. today, the protests were surprisingly big and at times surprisingly disorderly, but even still, they did not seem to interfere very much with the inaugural proceedings. That said, the inaugural proceedings ran very off time today, and at times they also just seemed off. There was, I think it's safe to say, there was light turnout for the Trump inauguration today. The new president had promised that he would break all records, that they would have a bigger crowd turning out for his inauguration than had ever turned out for any inauguration previously. Clearly, that did not happen. You've seen these pictures today, the comparison pictures from the Trump inauguration with the first term of President Obama. This is a view of the number of people who turned out in the unticketed area on the National Mall where anybody can come out to watch the events. Along the inaugural parade route, there definitely were places where there were crowds, both Trump supporters mostly and also some Trump protesters. But there were large stretches of the inaugural parade route that had nobody at all, or very few people. And there was this strange scene of large blocks of risers right next to the White House, right next to the reviewing stand, actually kind of prime seats for watching the inaugural parade that were basically empty. We were reporting today on that scene live today as it was happening, as the inaugural parade was starting up. And we were just looking at the same live pictures as anybody. You may have seen our coverage this afternoon when we were talking about this. We couldn't figure out how it was possible to have so many empty seats, especially in what counts as the good seats right next to the White House at the prime time and prime viewing position for the inaugural parade. We were wondering about that on the air. The inaugural committee got in touch to say that what happened there is that they'd had a logistical snafu. When the inaugural lunch on Capitol Hill ran late, they apparently couldn't figure out how to get ticket holders off Capitol Hill and into these prime seats for the parade. So they couldn't fill the risers. That's why the seats right around where the president and the vice president and their families were empty, right in front of the White House on these metal bleachers. So a little bit of a screw up there, and a lightly attended inauguration. And the parade ran very late. It ran until well after dark, which it was not supposed to do. It was supposed to be wrapped up by 5. Sunset was about 5:15 in D.C. It went on for a very long time thereafter. That's why you see the tractors with their headlights on. In fact, the parade ran so late that it ran well into the start time for some of the inaugural balls tonight, which means that the inaugural ball schedule and the president dancing with the first lady, all of that has been pushed back as well. But despite the screw-ups, they did get the important part right. There was no error in the oath of office this time, the way there was the last time Chief Justice John Roberts had to do it for a new president. They did the swearing in right, and they did it right on time. And that means whatever else went wrong today, the new president is in place. And this was day one. And we had all been told what to expect on day one. Right? This wasn't a mystery. We had been told over and over and over again with lots of exclamation points and pointing. We had been told what would happen on day one. It was not subtle.
The changes will start immediately. On my first day in office, I will direct my Secretary of the Treasury to label China a currency manipulator. Cancel every unconstitutional executive action, memorandum, and order issued by President Obama. Day one, my first hour in office, we are going to end catch and release. We catch them, all go ahead. Anyone who illegally crosses the border will be detained until they are removed out of our country. On the first day of my term of office, my administration will immediately pursue a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on all members of Congress. My first day in office, we will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
On my first day in office, as far as we know, they did not start working on a southern border wall today, let alone a southern border wall that is impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, and beautiful. What they did do today was sign a waiver, which allows the new Secretary of Defense to take office, even though the Defense Department is supposed to have civilian leadership, and General James Mattis, the nominee for that post, was only recently retired from the military. So what they did today on day one was sign the waiver that would allow him to serve. The Senate then approved his nomination. General Mattis was sworn in tonight as Defense Secretary. Also sworn in tonight, another general, retired General John Kelly, to lead the mammoth Department of Homeland Security. Less than a year after leaving active duty in the United States military. The president also signed an executive order related to the Affordable Care Act, related to Obamacare. Now, of course, he cannot repeal the Affordable Care Act by executive order, but he is, in this executive order, he's directing heads of the various agencies in the federal government that they should sort of go soft on regulations that might be associated with the health care law. Nobody quite knows what this executive order means in practical terms. It appears that he's, I mean, in layman's terms, he's just telling his administration to lean against it to the extent that they have power to, even though nothing about the law is changing yet. As I said, it's a little woolly. And in practical terms, we're not sure exactly what it means. We're consulting with health policy experts to try to figure it out. I have a degree in health policy. I read the executive order. I do not know what it means. But outside the White House, here's something important that happened that hasn't gotten a lot of attention yet. Outside the White House, quietly, in another administrative move, the new administration did take one other action today, and they didn't announce it. They certainly didn't announce in advance that they were going to do it. They also put out no announcement that they did do it. The only reason that we know they did it is because people in legal circles who are watching legal filings immediately noticed that they did this today without an announcement and without explaining why. And this little under-the-radar thing that they did today, this afternoon, is a very, very big deal. And that's a story that we've got straight ahead. Stay with us. President Trump has left the White House tonight on his way to the first of the 3 inaugural balls that he is going to tonight. You know how they always name the turkeys they're going to pardon, like Jingle and Bell or Salt and Pepper, or like they've got a little bit. The 2 inaugural balls that he's going to at the D.C. Convention tonight, D.C. Convention Center tonight, are the Liberty Ball and the Freedom Ball. which they could recycle as the names of the first turkeys that he could pardon at Thanksgiving. I'm just saying they go together well. He's going to the Liberty Ball first. And we think that at the Liberty Ball, which you're seeing there on the left side of your screen, we think that he and his wife will dance. We also expect that he will make remarks. When he talks, we'll go to it. After he leaves the Liberty Ball, he'll then go to the Freedom Ball, and then he's got one more, and that one's actually in a different building. That one's actually at the National Building Museum in D.C. That's the Armed Services one. But we'll keep an eye on this. This is the sort of the end of the pomp and circumstance of the evening, and this part of the night we thought would be over by now, but it's still going. Everything's running late. We'll keep you posted. So these things aren't usually this blunt. They're usually very dry and the language is very elliptical. They don't usually sound like this. Quote, "The evidence in the record demonstrates that proponents of the bill were motivated at the very least in part because of and not in spite of the law's detrimental effects on the African American and Hispanic electorate." Quote, "The record as a whole, including the legislators' knowledge that the bill would clearly impact minorities disproportionately and likely disenfranchise them, the record as a whole shows that the bill was racially motivated." The bill was racially motivated, full stop. It's not usually that blunt. But it sort of had to be, given what Texas did. After the voting rights was gutted by the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, Texas put in place a new voting restriction in that state. And the legislature knew that new law would disproportionately keep Black and Hispanic Texans from voting. Black and Hispanic Texans who were legally able to vote, but they wouldn't be able to anymore because of these new restrictions that the legislature was putting in place. And the legislature knew that when they were putting the new law in place. And a federal judge in Texas nailed them for that. Did an absolutely comprehensive review of the creation of that law and the testimony that legislators heard and what they studied and what they knew before they passed that law. And going through that legislative record, the trial judge in Texas, federal judge, absolutely nailed them for how deliberately racist that voter ID law was. This was the strictest voter ID law in the country. And the federal Justice Department sued Texas to stop it. And the judge in that case found in favor of the Justice Department, found against the state of Texas in this blistering, blunt, comprehensive ruling that said, yeah, when the legislature passed this law, it was deliberately designed to keep minorities from being able to vote, even though they were legally entitled to vote. And then after that ruling, two other three-judge panels, 6 more judges, also found the law to be unconstitutional. And then this past summer, the most conservative appeals court in the country also found that the law had a discriminatory effect. But the court said that they weren't convinced necessarily that the lawmakers had discriminatory intent, that they meant it to be discriminatory, even though it definitely was. So that part of it, they sent it back to the original judge who had written that blistering opinion condemning the law as racially motivated. And lawyers from the Justice Department, lawyers from the Voting Rights Division of the Justice Department, were due back in that judge's courtroom on Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday, to make their case again. They were due back on Tuesday. Now they're not going to be there on Tuesday. As of 12:01 p.m. today, the Justice Department is run by a new administration. And the new administration, for all of its disorganization and failure to staff key government posts, they made clear today that they've got a few priorities they're going to be jumping on immediately. Or I guess actually they made clear that they've got this one substantive priority that they're going to jump on immediately. They did not announce anything about it. But this is one of the very few things they actually did today on day one. They filed a motion in Texas asking to postpone that hearing on Tuesday in this voting rights case. They they asked that the hearing be put off, quote, because of the federal government's change in administration, which took place on January 20th, 2017. Because of the change in administration, the Department of Justice also experienced a transition in leadership. And new leadership in this case maybe means that Texas is going to be okay with its voter ID law that all courts agree is racially discriminatory. Tonight, the Texas court granted the new request from the new Justice Department. That hearing will be delayed by more than a month now, by which time, presumably, Jeff Sessions will be running the Justice Department as Attorney General. What do you think the Jeff Sessions Justice Department is going to say when it gets back in that courtroom in Texas? Think the U.S. Justice Department will still be on the side of the plaintiffs, arguing that Texas's voter ID law is intentionally discriminatory and it should be struck down? Do you think the Trump Justice Department will continue to push the case of black and Hispanic voters in Texas who have been disenfranchised by this law? We'll see, but here's a clue. It has been reported in the last 24 hours that President Trump's pick to head the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division is a man named John Gore. We don't have official confirmation of this from the Trump administration, but we know who John Gore is, and we know that last week he withdrew as the lawyer who was in charge of defending the North Carolina bathroom bill, the anti-trans bathroom bill. He withdrew from that case because he said he would, quote, imminently be departing from his law firm and thus will no longer be able to represent the defendants. And the other thing we know about John Gore is that when he's not defending anti-LGBT discrimination bills, his real expertise is defending electoral redistricting plans against claims of civil rights violations. And that apparently is going to be the guy in charge of civil rights in the Trump administration. That reportedly is their pick to head up the Civil Rights Division in the Department of Justice. You can tell a lot about a new administration's priorities by what they do on their first day. In this case, they'd promised the moon and the stars and they'd be building the wall. What they did was put the brakes on a voting rights case. That was pretty much Act One. Let's put up that split screen that I was just looking at in the commercial break. Can you guys pop that up from the control room? Do we have either of those images? What we've been watching tonight is a couple of different things unfolding. On the left side of your screen, you can tell immediately what that is, right? That is an inaugural ball where the new president is expected to appear very shortly. He has already arrived at the D.C. Convention Center. On the right side of your screen, that's one of the many protests still going on around the country tonight against the new president. That is the scene in Portland, Oregon right now. You see a lot of protesters in the street and a lot of police in riot gear and helmets. We're continuing to watch both of these things unfold in parallel tonight. We'll be right back. President and the new first. We expect to see.
That is what I call great talent. Thank you very much. Great talent. Thank you. Well, we did it. We began this journey, and they said we and me, we didn't have a chance, but we knew we were going to win, and we won. And today we had a great day. People that weren't so nice to me were saying that we did a really good job today. They hated to do it, but they did it. And I respect that. I respect that. But I have to say, the crowd was unbelievable today. You know, I looked at the rain, which just never came. You know, we finished the speech, went inside, it poured, then we came outside. The helicopter scene was an incredible scene. An incredible scene. So beautiful. Like from a movie set, so beautiful. And then, amazingly, it rained, and then we went out. It's like God was looking down on us, I will tell you. I want to thank all of our supporters. My #1 supporter, Melania, what she puts up with. Oh. Thank you, honey. No, we really did something that's so special. And this evening is so special. And this whole day and yesterday, so incredible. So many people made such a difference. Vice President Mike Pence, no more elect, was incredible. And all of the people, you're going to see things happening over the next few weeks. Oh, you're going to be so happy. You're going to be. Because, you know, they're very elegant people tonight, but they're also very political people, right? We want to see great things happen for our country. We want to make America great again, and we will. And we will. So now it's a tremendous honor to have the first dance with Melania. And we're going to be joined by our Vice President. We're going to be joined by some very wonderful, wonderful children as we go along. They happen to be my children and Mike's children. And I just want to, again, I want to thank everybody. We always felt we were going to do it. It's a movement like they've never seen anywhere, at any time, anywhere in the world. This was a movement. And now the work begins. Now the work begins. There's no games, right? No games, right? We're not playing games. The work begins. I want to thank everybody. We love you. We're going to be working for you. And we're going to be producing results. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you. Thank you.
And now, the President and First Lady of the United States will take their first dance. Ladies and gentlemen, the first couple, Donald and Melania Trump.
So I face the final curtain.
My friend, I'll say it clear. I'll state my case, of which I'm certain.
I've lived a life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway and more, much more than this. I did it my way.
Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention.
I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption.
That's going to happen a couple more times tonight. I think the most inaugural balls any president has ever held were the 14 balls that were held for Bill Clinton when the Democrats got back in power after 12 years out of office, and there was some pent-up demand for some Democratic glitz. We will have only 3 inaugural ball appearances tonight by the new president and the new vice president and their families. That was a nice touch, the way they not only had the first dance themselves, as sort of first the president and the first lady, and then the vice president and his wife Karen Pence, but then they brought up all their adult children to join them as well. Kind of a big display of adult Trumps and Pences. So that was the Liberty Ball, I believe. One's called the Liberty Ball, one's called the Freedom Ball. Forgive me if I'm mixing them up. They're synonyms. But they're going to be going to the second ball, which is either Liberty or Freedom, whichever one that wasn't. It's also, wait, which one was that, Corey? That was Liberty, now they're going to Freedom? See? You can see how I might mix this up. If I tried to say it again now, I'd still get it wrong. They're going to the next one that is also in the DC Convention Center, in the same building. It doesn't even really have a different theme. It's kind of like Ball A and Ball B. Anyway, they move now on to Ball B, where they will do the same thing. There are different performers there. There's obviously a different crowd. It's in the same kind of room, in the same building, and they will dance to the same song. And presumably they will pull the same trick where it's first the president and the first lady, and then Mike Pence and his wife, and then lots of Trumps and Pences, and we will see them. Obviously, everybody is dressed beautifully. The men all in tuxes, and the women all wearing incredibly nice gowns. The consensus here among the floor crew and myself is that the Ivanka Trump gown with the sort of sheer thing with the studded things on it is a crowd pleaser. I like the First Lady's gown very much. I like that structural element. Obviously, me talking about fashion is, yeah, it's a little bit like Popeye the Sailor Man talking about astrophysics. Funny, it might come out with an intriguing accent, but nothing that you should count on. In any case, we'll keep an eye on the Freedom Ball, which is in another corner of the Walter E. Washington Convention Center in Washington, D.C., and we will bring you that as soon as they get there. Stay with us. I know there's inaugural balls and stuff. I know, and we'll cover it, I promise. But here's a piece of news that I cannot believe we got today. I can't believe we got an answer to this story today, given what day it is, but we got an answer to the story today, and it's amazing. All right. Day one of the presidential campaign of Donald Trump was like a year and a half ago, June 16th, 2015. Day one of his campaign, that was the escalator ride down to his big announcement speech and him calling Mexican immigrants rapists and all, right, you remember. But you might remember there was also another strange logistical thing that happened on day one of that Trump campaign.
That is some group of people, thousands. So nice. Thank you very much. That's really nice. Thank you. It's great to be at Trump Tower. It's great to be in a wonderful city, New York. And it's an honor to have everybody here. This is beyond anybody's expectations. There's been no crowd like this. And I can tell you, some of the candidates, they went in, they didn't know the air conditioner didn't work. They sweated like dogs. They didn't know the room was too big because they didn't have anybody there. How are they going to beat ISIS? I don't think it's going to happen.
That was day one. Wow, whoa, look at all those people, thousands. There's been no crowd like this. This is beyond anyone's expectations for a crowd, right? None of the other candidates could do that. That was day one, okay? By day two of the Trump campaign, that crowd started to become a story because it started to maybe seem like maybe that Trump crowd wasn't a normal crowd. By day two of the Trump campaign, this was the Hollywood Reporter. Quote, Donald Trump campaign offered actors $50 to cheer for him at presidential announcement. The Hollywood Reporter, of all places, they got hold of an email from a casting company called The Extra Mile that hires extras. According to that email, the casting company, had been hired by a political consulting group to provide a cast of extras, to provide paid actors for, quote, an event in support of Donald Trump and an upcoming exciting announcement he will be making at this event. We understand that this is not a traditional background job. A background job in the business means you're being an extra. But, quote, we believe acting comes in all forms, was the end of that announcement. So that was day two of the extraordinary campaign of Donald Trump. That big crowd from day one at his announcement, at least some of them, reportedly paid $50 a pop to stand there with signs and pretend to be an enthusiastic Donald Trump supporter. People there as paid extras. That was how his campaign started. Well, today was how his administration started. Today was day one of his administration. And how weird is it that today that story finally got explained? That story finally got resolved. And again, it's courtesy of the Hollywood Reporter. Here's the new headline in the Hollywood Reporter. Quote, Donald Trump escapes FEC punishment over paid actors at presidential announcement. After those initial reports came out that they had to pay people to pretend to be Donald Trump supporters at his first announcement, the Trump campaign denied it. They denied they ever had any paid actors. But the Trump campaign did ultimately pay a particular political consulting company $12,000 for its services for that launch event. And that political consulting company is apparently proud of the work they did there. They made a YouTube video about it and everything. And in fact, they've just announced they're opening up a D.C. office now that there is a Trump administration in Washington, D.C. But that political consulting company, they had to answer an FEC complaint that was filed about whether or not the Trump campaign properly accounted for its payment to that consulting company. And in its response to that complaint, the consulting company admitted that it paid for the extras. Quote, as part of the staffing of the event, Gotham did retain Extra Mile Incorporated, which is the casting company for extras, to provide assistance in providing administrative staff for the campaign's announcement event. Now, administrative staff, okay, maybe that's how Extra Mile Incorporated does not offer administrative staffing on their list of services. They don't provide administrative staff. They don't provide like typists. What they provide is actors. They provide extras. Quote, Extra Mile is an ideal resource for casting directors and producers to look to book background actors in feature films, television commercials, music videos, industrials, promotional videos, and print jobs. And that brings us to today, day one of the Trump administration. Because now the FEC has announced that it has closed that complaint from 2015 about the payment to that consulting firm and whether or not it was properly accounted for. And so now we know on day one of the Trump administration that on day one of the Trump campaign, they really did pay a company that appears to have hired paid extras to pretend to be Donald Trump supporters at his initial presidential announcement. He eventually got real supporters, of course, and real numbers at his events, but the first news gift of the news administration is now the surefire knowledge that at least when they started, they had to pay for it. That's what we learned on day one. What will day two bring? Exciting times. You have to watch to the end here. This is really good. Late last year, the Hall of Presidents Museum in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania closed its doors for the last time. Since the 1950s, it's a museum that has displayed wax figures of all our past presidents and first ladies. This month, all 44 wax presidents were sold in an auction. And as I have told you on this show, we bought one of the wax figures. We bought President Dwight Eisenhower in casual clothing in a seated position. Seemed like a great idea at the time until we looked at a map and realized that our offices in New York City are more than 200 miles away from where Ike was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And you can't like just put a few stamps on his forehead and put him in a mailbox. He's in the seated position, right? So road trip. Producer Nick Tutz, producer Kelsey Desiderio took off. It was a sunny day, perfect conditions. They pulled up to the museum in Gettysburg, and when they got there, he was waiting for them. There he was, sitting patiently, ready to feel the breeze, hit the open road. He's very precious cargo. It should be noted he's old, he's delicate, he's made mostly of wood and fiberglass with a wax coating. President Eisenhower has been serving his country indoors and in a seated position for a long time. His joints aren't really very bendy anymore. Getting him in the car was not easy. We didn't want to have to strap him to the, roof. He's the 34th president of the United States. That would be disrespectful. So this, with the utmost care, in order to fit him, Kelsey and Nick had to take his head off so that they could then jimmy him into the front seat. He was just a little tall for our rental car. He didn't seem to mind. They were able to get the head back on. But still, it's weird. with traffic. It's about a 5-hour drive from Gettysburg to New York City. But hey, with him, no bathroom break needed. That said, because he's made of wax, he's sun sensitive. Just after sunset, though, ta-da! We carried dear Ike over the threshold of his new home. He had some admirers checking him out as we carted him through the lobby. And now, behold, here he is, our very own Dwight Eisenhower in his new habitat. Not at all creepy, not at all. He's nice to have around. Today is a lot of things. Today is the 64th anniversary of the inauguration of President Dwight D. Eisenhower as President of the United States. And frankly, we feel lucky to have him. We want to learn how to clean him next, but we feel lucky to have him. We are kind of thinking of taking him on another road trip sometime soon. Maybe with a bigger car so we don't have to remove his head. But Ike, thanks for being here, sir. That does it for us tonight. We'll see you again Monday. Now it's time for The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, my friend Lawrence O'Donnell.
Rachel, how's that?